Um, Hello everyone. It's my first time doing an AMA like this. I'm usually used to doing uh, more like Q&A directly in Zoom. So hopefully some people are watching. My name is Patrick. I'm a co-founder and the founding CEO of Rotten Tomatoes. Let's see, I'll go in my background real quick. My parents they were born in China, but they went to Taiwan when they were very young because of the war. And they went to the US for grad school. I was born in Los Angeles. My dad was an assistant professor at UCLA. Then later on, he went over to Maryland to be a professor at University of Maryland. So we moved to Maryland when I was 5, grew up in Maryland through high school, went back to California to attend college at UC Berkeley. Started as electrical engineering, computer science over there, switched to computer science, switched to business, eventually ended up as cognitive science. So I left school after about 2 years. It took me another 10 years to finish my undergrad. So it took me 12 years to do it in total. I left in order to do one of my first startups. I've done a total of 6 different startups. Rotten Tomatoes was the third. So super quick intro. So let's see, why the name Rotten Tomatoes? So my co-founder Sen, before Rotten Tomatoes, I had a design firm. It was focused on web design for the entertainment industry. And Sen was one of our creative directors. And he was a huge movie buff. And the idea or the name for Rotten Tomatoes was basically, back in the day, I don't know, during like say Shakespeare, stuff like that. If an actor or a performance was really bad, people would throw rotten fruits and vegetables at the performers. So that's kind of how he came up with the name Rotten Tomatoes. The idea for Rotten Tomatoes basically was, you could open up a newspaper. I think even nowadays you can still do it. And there would be like these full page ads for movies, and they would look like a movie poster filled with quotes. But the main issue would be that those quotes would always be positive, even if the movie was really bad. And so Sen's idea was, what if we show all the quotes, good and bad, but only from professional critics? Because sometimes they'd also include quotes from folks that weren't actually professional critics. They'd be like a radio station DJ or something like that. And so that's how the idea came about. And then as far as inspiration, Sen was a huge Jackie Chan fan. And so he wanted to know when the movie Rush Hour was coming out, what all the critics were saying about the movie. And so that was kind of the inspiration. Back when he first started, this was in 1998. Most reviews were not online. So he actually went to the library to go and look at magazines and newspapers to actually go and find the reviews, read the reviews, figure out if it was a good or bad review, and to write down a quote. And then he went back to go and build a website. And from the moment he thought of the idea to actually launching it was 2 weeks. And he didn't know how to code. He was our creative director. So he was on the design side. And so everything was made in just static HTML. Let's see. Question from Faik Moki. Sorry if I messed up the name. What is the early story of Rotten Tomatoes? How did you get your first 100,000 visitors? So in terms of traffic, I think almost immediately at launch, it started getting some notice. It was, getting featured on different sites like Yahoo and Netscape. where it might get like cool site of the day or week or month. Um, he was submitting to search engines, so we were getting search engine traffic from it. That was actually our primary source of traffic. But I think the biggest thing that he did that was very smart was that in the beginning, the focus was only on wide release movies, which are movies that release to the whole United States at once, um, and coming out that week. And generally, it was, you know, between 3 to maybe 5 movies in a week that would come out. And so those were only ones he focused on. But what was really good was those happened to also be the movies that people care about the most when they're trying to make a decision on what to see. And so he did that every week. He would, you know, cover the next few movies coming out. And after about a month or two, he basically had every movie, you know, every wide release movies that were actually still in theaters. And that movies that were in theaters at any given point in time were pretty much like 70% of the traffic. And even if you take into account, say, big movies coming out over the next year or two, plus the movies that are actually in theaters, yeah, that's like 70% traffic. It's like 100, 200 movies. And if you're talking about wide release movies, it's a lot less than that. It's, you know, probably like 50 movies or so. That was something that was really good because he could put a lot of energy into making each what we called movie package very good. You know, when you're talking about 3 or 4 movies a week, even if you're talking 50 reviews per movie, you know, that's only 150 to 200, you know, 250 reviews that you'd have to gather. And so one person could do that. But each of those movie packages was incredibly useful immediately. And I see a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to make, you know, let's say something like a Yelp or whatever. And I'm going around and building all these like scrapers and et cetera to basically gather around the whole country, you know, let's say every merchant. And like, how much data are you going to have per merchant? Like, you're lucky to just get a name and maybe an address. And that's not useful to almost anyone, you know? But instead, he had 3 or 4 things that people cared a lot about, and he had really good information on them, and it was useful from day one. So I think that was really the number one thing that made it work from the beginning. Question from Heather McCabe. What are you up to these days? What are you geeking out about? Hi, Heather. I can see you on Zoom. So for me, one big thing was I actually got married about a week ago. Didn't do like, you know, a real wedding, obviously, or didn't even do a Zoom wedding. Just did the like civil, like went to a county clerk, got the marriage license, had my mom become an officiant for a day to do the ceremony, and then got the marriage certificate. And the idea would be to do a real wedding, you know, sometime in the future when it's safe, you know, again. And then in the past week, doing Zoom calls with family, like my wife's family, my family on my mom's side, my family on my dad's side, and just last night with some, you know, very close friends, just to kind of, you know, chat with folks and share the news. But haven't formally announced it in public. I mean, I guess this would be the closest to that. Haven't announced on Facebook or anything like that yet. So that's one thing. Thank you for the kind wishes. And what am I geeking out about? Well, I think my plan is, you know, I've been helping Mozilla builders the past few months. I think, what day is today? In 2 days, we're going to have the big Fix the Internet day launch for the program, which is kind of like our version of our demo day. And after that, my plan is to try to go to Taiwan for a few months, have a lot of friends, a lot of tech founder friends who have actually moved over there. And at least for the short term because of COVID. And so I've been looking to go over more to just hang out with them and kind of see what's going on there. What are they working on? You know, folks like Steve Chen, who co-founded YouTube. He's been there for the past year. Kevin Lin, who is a co-founder of Twitch, is going there also in a few weeks. And it's just a bunch of other tech founder friends. So think about going there, seeing what they're up to, you know, being in a place where it's a lot safer to go out and hang out without having all the protections that we have to have over here in the States. And I've been thinking about, you know, looking at possibly getting on more on the venture side, trying to see if it's possible to put together a fund to invest in the intersection of tech and entertainment. That's an area that I've always been interested in. And I know I like to work with startups and stuff. So I've been looking at that, and I'm want to explore to see if Taiwan might be a good place to kind of start putting that together. So that's what I'm up to these days. All right, let's see. Question from Suryavanshi Verendas, and sorry if I scripted the name. What was the key factor that convinced you to take the risk of delaying your coursework and investing your time in a startup? Did you measure any calculated risks? And during this phase, how did you support yourself financially? That's a good question. So my first startup wasn't even really much of a startup. It was like we were just selling computer systems and components from our apartment. You know, we're in the Bay Area, so we were pretty close to Silicon Valley. You know, just half an hour to an hour drive from where we were. You could buy a lot of the parts directly from distributors. So so all we did was, you know, essentially we'd go out and post into different places like Usenet and other places into our own networks, and people would want to buy things. We would collect the money in advance, place the order. Then hopefully when we had enough orders, we would drive down, pick up the parts, and if it was like a computer or something, we'd go and actually build computers and deliver it. The main thing was, I think I was just really impatient to go out and do something. I didn't necessarily want to just spend all this time in school. I was actually kind of getting bored, and found other friends who were also just similarly interested in doing startups. Like out of the four of us that left school at that time to go do business and startups, three of us are still, you know, went the entrepreneurial path. One person went more of the normal path. So definitely people were of the same mindset as myself. I think the other thing was, you know, I always felt like, you know, when people went from high school to college, everyone just spread out everywhere, mostly within the US. And I could see similarly a lot of times when people, you know, left school, they'd spread everywhere for jobs. And I really wanted to keep, you know, friends together, do something that seemed interesting to us. So, you know, all 6 startups I've done were with friends, usually at least one co-founder who I knew pretty much within the freshman year of college. A number of them were just literally down the hall from me. My co-founder Sen from Rotten Tomatoes was down the hall from me. Yeah, so that was another reason why I wanted to go and do something. And as far as how do I support myself financially, I had worked like a part-time job in college. I had some savings. So initially we just put our own savings in to kind of do it. And because what we were doing wasn't, I mean, it was a business, but it wasn't really exactly a startup. but we made money like right away, because we just set pricing that was above what the item cost, and we held very little inventory, so we were able to make enough money to at least cover rent and stuff. Um, did you measure any calculated risks? Not really, because I was still kind of taking classes on the side. It was just at a much slower pace, so so I was still kind of doing both, but I was just so impatient to try and go and do my own thing. So that was the main thing. Okay. Question from Pradyam Gupta. Uh, how should one connect to the right investor or accelerator? Accelerator programs, there are a lot out there. The most well-known is Y Combinator. Obviously, I think other well-known ones are like Techstars, 500 Startups are probably, I would say, probably the top three. And then there's a lot of additional ones, lots. Like I would say a lot of universities have their own. I think Stanford has StartX, Berkeley has Berkeley Skydeck. There's a lot of ones that are geographic, like Hawaii has Blue Startups. Actually, I think they have like 8 accelerators in Hawaii. I'm not as familiar with the other ones. There's ones like Mozilla Builders. Uh, I've never looked, but I imagine there might be some sites out there that have hopefully a fairly comprehensive list of accelerators. So I would look into things like colleges, your local colleges, geographically where you are, ones by industry. There's ones, like SOS Ventures has ones that focus specifically on different industries, like mobile one. They have FoodX, which focuses on food, Indie Bio, which is around biotech, Hackcelerator, which is around hardware. I believe there's ones around education. There's many different ones. So I think look out there. A lot of them have very similar, where they will put in some money. I want to say it's usually between 20 to 150,000 US. Usually around a 2 million cap, and usually in a format of 3 months with a demo day at the end. And so there are a lot out there. I wouldn't say you want to join too many of them, because the amount they give in terms of money versus the equity they take, it's not necessarily the best value. It's great for them, but it's not necessarily the best value for the entrepreneurs. But I think the programs themselves can add a lot of value. But again, 1, maybe 2, like if you got into 1, improved your startup to a point, and then you could get into like a Y Combinator, great, go ahead and do that. But you wouldn't want to join 10 in a row or something. I think that wouldn't make any sense. As far as investors, a lot of it I think would be work your existing network. I would also get out there, do some research, get on LinkedIn, get on these places, get on Crunchbase. Look for companies, say on Crunchbase, that are similar space and industry to your own. See who's invested in them. That will give you a really good, and then just kind of chain it. Find the companies that invest in those investors that invested into the companies that are similar to yours. See what else they're investing in, and you can just kind of keep expanding that, and you can pretty much find the whole ecosystem of investors that are interested in your space. It doesn't take a long time. You could definitely do all that research within like a week or so, and then it's a matter of trying to figure out how to reach out to them. LinkedIn can work. People do respond, not always, but some of them will. And then there's also usually lots of events, and these days events are pretty much virtual, so you can get out there and get into those events, ask questions, network. Yeah. Okay, so question from Moid Hassan. what is the scope of data science in a company like Rotten Tomatoes, and what kind of problems are you trying to solve with artificial intelligence? So with Rotten Tomatoes, at least when we started, there was no AI involved at all. Everything was gathered by hand. Later on, we wrote parsers and stuff to try and grab things, built a content management system to put it all in one place. So it made it easier and faster for our editors to create pages for it on Rotten Tomatoes. Then later on, we added critic submissions where we allowed critics to submit the reviews themselves. And then after that, we added user reviews to allow users to add their own reviews in. One thing I always wanted to do with something like Rotten Tomatoes was to create like what I call critics batching. And that would have been probably using AI and machine learning, which would be like, as you put in reviews, it could start trying to figure out what critics or what other users are you most similar to, with the idea being that they could, in aggregate, be a better predictor of what you should be seeing and what you'll like than all critics or all users or all friends. And Rotten Tomatoes, we never did that. We didn't have the resources for that. I don't even know if we even have enough data for that. Now, maybe, but it would require a ton of data. But the ideal version I would say is where every movie has a different score for every user. So that horror comedy or whatever that you love, someone else might hate. And so for you, it might say like a 90%, and someone else, it might say it's a 10% for them. But I think that's the kind of stuff that you could only really do with AI and with just a ridiculous amount of data. Okay. Thank you for the congratulations. We're interested. As you mentioned, we initially took reviews from professional critics. Did you pay them, or how did you attract them for writing a review on Rotten Tomatoes? Also, initially during starting days, did you focus on gaining customers or more on the managing ads on the platform for monetization? So for critics, in the beginning, all we did was we didn't ask them at all. We just gathered the reviews, but we didn't host the reviews on our site. We just had a quote and we linked over to their review if they had it. Once we created parsers to scrape reviews, it was an opt-out system. So we would email them in advance and say, hey, we're going to be scraping your reviews to link to and reply if you don't want us to do that. And very few critics, I think most of them probably didn't even see it or they didn't care. So we had very, very few critics ever opt out. And then as the traffic on our site continued to grow, as people became more aware of the name, we started having lots of critics writing to us asking how do we get included in Tomato Meter? Because we are essentially like a search engine for movie reviews. And no, we never paid them or anything like that. For bigger critics, we would work with them more closely to make sure that we were properly getting the reviews in and everything, because we wanted to make sure they were included. And initially, as far as monetization, I mean, when Sen was running it, he didn't really do any monetization. Well, this was before Google AdSense even existed. So when we first started, we were able to cut a deal with through a contact that some of our investors made with CNET, and they were buying our ads on our site. And so we did monetize once we had started running it as a real company, but pretty much for us, we were focused around three things. Like anything we did or built, we tried to, it had to either help our brand, help our traffic, or help our revenue, and ideally help multiple of those things. And for us, because we were heavily advertising and affiliate revenue based, as our traffic grew, our revenue would grow. Let's see. Patrick, you hold a BA in cognitive science with an emphasis on computer science. And it took me basically 10 years to finish the last 2 years worth of school because I would take classes on and off or take out a year or two if I got busy. That was over the course of 3 different startups. Okay, I'm not sure if that was a question, but yeah, I mean, that's basically what happened. I ended up with cognitive science because it was, one, the classes I had taken up to that point happened to fit cog sci really well. And so I would need the least amount of classes to actually be able to finish and get a degree in something. The other reason is, cog sci is interdisciplinary, so it covers a lot of different areas, and which I really enjoyed. We were taking classes in not just cognitive science, there's computer science, linguistics, philosophy, psychology, neurobiology, logic, lots of different things. So I found that very interesting. And then the third was my dad. One of the things he was working a lot around was artificial intelligence and cognitive science, which is like the study of how people learn related to artificial intelligence. I mean, that was one of the courses that was under the program. So that was another reason I was interested. And yeah, it took me a long time. To be honest, I haven't really used it directly in any of my startups, but I think one thing that was interesting about CogSci that also was interesting about the different startups I've done was just how wide and varied the classes were, how wide and varied my startups were, as far as, and as also the kind of like roles. I was kind of the one person who would just do whatever you needed to do to get things done. Like I wasn't exactly a salesperson or the engineer or the graphic designer or the financial officer, but I just did all the extra stuff. So I thought there was one book I read recently called, I think it's called Breadth, that was, is that the right name? That talked a lot about that stuff, and I thought it was very relevant to my own experience. I mean, if you look at the 6 startups I've done, first was selling computer system components. Second was a web design firm for the entertainment industry. Third was Rotten Tomatoes. Fourth was a company in China that was a little bit like Yelp. Fifth was a company in Hong Kong that was like MySpace, working with celebrities and artists over there. And the last one was a mobile gaming company, so in the Bay Area. So it's just all over the place as far as the types of businesses that I've done. Okay, so question from Ray. Hi, Ray. Good to see you here. You mentor a lot of ventures. Can you talk about why you mentor and share an example or two of your most memorable mentoring experiences? So I think, I think, even when I was in college, I was actually quite into this form of martial arts called wushu, which is Chinese martial art. It's not really for fighting. It's more performance and competition based, kind of like gymnastics or something. It was the martial arts that Jet Li did when he was in China before he became like a famous, film actor. So I was really into that. I was actually teaching classes there at Berkeley, as in a student instructor and stuff. So it's something I think I've always enjoyed doing. I found that as I did all these different startups, I've learned a lot. I made a ton of mistakes, and if I could help other people hopefully avoid some of those same mistakes, some obvious mistakes that I made, that would be cool. Even when we were doing our design firm, doing Rotten Tomatoes, sometimes like Berkeley, like they would ask us to go speak at classes or things, or sometimes even one one class brought their students by our design firm so they could even just see what people were working on the internet. Back then, the internet was still relatively new. And so it's something I've been doing pretty much ever since college. Doing a lot more these days, doing a lot more, obviously after Rotten Tomatoes, doing a lot more speaking, a lot more mentoring. So yeah, it's something I've really enjoyed. Especially these days when wasn't doing a startup, and that was all I've ever done for most of my career. It also makes me feel useful when I'm out there being able to help other people. Most memorable mentoring experiences, I think some of the coolest things were actually more like a couple things. Is one, it's always cool when I give a talk or help mentor some folks. Recently I've been giving a lot of talks around focus, and for people to write in and actually say that it would like really help them, or they went back and they were rethought a lot of things about their business, or especially if they're like, hey, we went and changed things based around your talk or your feedback, and it made a big difference, like immediate difference. Like that is obviously super, super cool when it happens. I've seen it happen many, many times, when they focus down what they're doing and actually their business picks up. That's really cool. I think in some cases where I really like a startup, I make some intros and they end up raising money from like a really good investor. I've made intros where, Steve Chen from YouTube has invested, or Kevin Lin from Twitch has invested, or one time a venture firm, multiple times a venture firm has invested like $500,000. And that's always cool. I think two experiences that were also, I think, super cool. One was when that movie Crazy Rich Asians came out, there was one actor who he played the groom, the guy who got married in the movie, Chris Pang. And when I was doing my MySpace-like company in Hong Kong, he was just starting out as an actor in Australia. I think one time he was coming through Hong Kong, and we went to get coffee, and he was just asking about like breaking into the industry. What are my thoughts on it? And I'm not an actor or anything, but I've kind of sat on the sidelines of entertainment for a while, and so I just gave him my feedback on what I was seeing, what I thought worked, what didn't, and whatever. And to be honest, I actually didn't even remember having that coffee meeting. But after the movie came out, I saw him and was catching up with him, not too long afterwards. And I was like, hey, congrats on the success of the movie. That's amazing. And he was like, yeah, man, don't you remember when we got the coffee and you're taking all this time out to like give me advice on stuff? And I was like, oh, really? That's awesome. That is super cool. And I looked at my phone and I did have, his contact info. So I'm like, I know for sure I've met him, but I had many, many meetings similar to that during that time. And that was super cool. And then the other one I would say was also very cool is one time in Hong Kong, some people invited me to be on a panel talking about, tech startups and stuff. And so I was doing that, and I ended up taking a picture with a bunch of high school students who were there at the time. And then, just a year ago or so, I met some folks, invited them to come speak at a conference I was putting on. And one of them was the co-founder of DoorDash, which is like a big food delivery platform in the States, the chief product officer. And he sent me a photo, and that's what the photo was. He was in high school before he went to, college over in Stanford and stuff, before he started DoorDash. It was just me with a bunch of high school kids taking a photo together. And he was showing me that. He still had that photo. And I was like, holy moly, like, these folks that came to watch my talk, he ended up doing DoorDash. And so stuff like that is always super interesting. And you just never know. One of the companies that was in a program at the Berkeley Launch Competition, which is like a startup competition at Berkeley, I was a mentor at that program. I wasn't their mentor, but they won the competition. I thought they had a great idea. I was just chatting with them at the like mixer afterwards. I was like, oh, your stuff is awesome. It's really neat. Let me know if you ever want, these connections to these different investors who are interested in that space. They're like, cool, thanks. And then like, I want to see, it was like over a year, maybe a year and a half later, they pinged me And they're like, hey, we saw you're connected to this investor. Can you make an intro? I'm like, oh, sure. And so I made the intro. Ultimately, those investors, talked to them, didn't invest, but I was like, oh, if you want to I can make some other intros, made some other intros. And one investor invested $500,000. And these guys, they've been doing amazing. And they actually brought me in as an advisor, and they're raising on like a $400 million valuation right now. And this was they only started like 3 years ago. So all really interesting experiences. You just never know what will come out. And I'm not even trying to do it to get something. It's just super neat when you know that you help someone, or even don't even know that you help someone, and down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the line, they're doing amazing. So yeah. Okay. Oh, from Harshit. How did cognitive science interdisciplinary exploration help you then and beyond? After Rotten Tomatoes and other successive prior startups, you didn't really need to take classes. Still, you took and completed your degree. What was the drive behind it? Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think if you read that book, I believe it's called, let me double check actually on my Kindle. It's on my Kindle. I just finished reading it not too long ago. Business. It's called, it's called Range. That's what it's called. Range by David Epstein. But it talks about this idea of trying out a lot of things and being able to like mix up the way you think about a problem. And what they found, if you read that book, was folks that were very, very narrow and very deep in one thing. That's all they ever studied, like a very particular, type of, I don't know, let's say lung cancer, or even a very rare form of some kind of lung cancer, whatever. They ended up not being able necessarily, when they were confronted with like a new problem, they could only attack it one way. It's like they're a hammer and everything is a nail to them, versus people who had either teams or people that had a wide variety of things. They could look at it and try approaching it with many different like range of ideas, and generally would end up with a better solution. It doesn't mean to be unfocused necessarily when you're doing your business or anything like that, but it was more about being able to see, I think, more out of the box, because like in school, kind of like the deeper you go into one particular field, a lot of times it also narrows your vision. It kind of puts blinders on you. So I think when I read that, it really kind of like backed up a lot of things that I had personally seen with what I was doing. So, and then as far as trying to finish, I mean, for me, it was more about just finishing something I had started. I felt like I wanted to go to Asia after we were selling Rotten Tomatoes. So but I was worried that if I went to Asia, I might not ever come back to the Bay Area. And so I would never be able to graduate. And so once I sold Rotten Tomatoes, I took a full semester of classes because I was super close just to finish. And then I went to Asia, finished something I started. Also, my parents had really wanted me to go and get a degree and everything. And I just felt like I also wanted to finish for that. So, okay. Question from Nishith Shetty. How fast was your initial MVP to real customer duration? So for Rotten Tomatoes, like I said, send from the idea to launch 2 weeks. He built it in static HTML, and he just focused on the 3 or 4 movies that were out that week. And it pretty much started getting some traffic right away. Within the first year of launch, he was just running it on the side. We were all running our design firm still. And so he was doing it just as a hobby, on nights and weekends. But it still was getting featured on sites like Yahoo and Netscape. Roger Ebert, who was a very famous film critic at the time, he had a show called, Siskel and Ebert. Roger Ebert wrote an article for a magazine and where he listed out his favorite movie websites, and Rotten Tomatoes is one of them. And this is within the first year. And uh, when Pixar released A Bug's Life, we saw a spike in traffic, and it turned out that that traffic was coming from Pixar. So yeah, I mean, we started seeing traction like immediately. Okay. Question from Pradam Gupta. When you started Rotten Tomatoes, I'm sure you might not have enough amount of data, and you may find people to start similar startups everywhere. How did you cope with that? Wait, let me see. Let me see. Data, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the data. Oh, you wrote again. Hello. I mean, when you started, maybe the algorithm your team build might not be perfect in comparison to right now. How are you able to get consumer trust, and same with the investor? Okay, so like I said, we focused around movies coming out that week. At the time, there were sites, I mean, people were doing reviews, critic reviews, individual critic reviews to kind of tell you should you watch a movie or not, but no one aggregated it. I mean, the closest to aggregation at the time was Siskel and Ebert, and they were just thumbs up, thumbs down. That's two people, right? Either they both agreed or they disagreed. And so aggregation was something that was pretty new. Again, because it happened to focus on the movies coming out that week, it was immediately useful from day one. And so really the only thing we were looking at was traffic. Were people coming, where traffic was coming from, how to keep growing that traffic. So compared to what was available, it was just different. And pretty much the same methodology that Sen had created, where 60% or above is considered fresh, meaning you should see the movie. He was looking in that case for it to be a super majority. So a majority would have otherwise been like 51%. He wanted a super majority, that's why he chose 60%. It's still the same now, over 20 years later, 21 years later. Let's see. So I mean, he was kind of very lucky in that he just happened to pick the thing that really worked. As far as competition, we've had a lot of copycats, competition in the past. No one's ever been able to do it quite the same as us. I think the closest was a company called Metacritic, and they basically try to do Rotten Tomatoes for movies and games and music. I have met some folks who like Metacritic's system better, the way they handle things. They do it a little bit differently. They are they're featured on IMDb. They got bought by CNET. CNET tried to buy us, couldn't get us, and eventually bought Metacritic. Metacritic is primarily known for games. They do 3 categories. We only really do 1. I mean, 2 if you count TV. You would expect that their traffic is 3 times ours, but it's not. It's still quite a bit lower than Rotten Tomatoes. And I think, again, it goes back down to focus, that them doing 3 categories is not 3x our traffic. But they're probably the closest as far as competitors, and it wasn't really a big problem. I think other companies and stuff tried to start aggregating some critic reviews and stuff, but not at the level that we did. And as far as investors go, we didn't really hit up our investors until about a year after the site was launched. Sen was just working on the side. We noticed it was growing in traffic. I approached our clients from our design firm to see what they thought, and some of the clients were our investors. So they already knew what we could do as a design firm, and they could see the data from Rotten Tomatoes over the course of a year, the traction. And so then they were able to invest. Okay. Question from Abhimanyu Sims Sekwat. Sorry about if I screw up the name. Your advice for a working professional who is not able to pinpoint a specific field of computer science to specialize even after 2 years of working. Um, I would say think about what is it that you're really interested in doing. I've never really thought in terms of uh, a field. I've always thought more in terms of startups, and for startups, it's much more about you know an area that you're interested in. Like Rotten Tomatoes with movies, and a problem that you're solving with Rotten Tomatoes is like, what movie should we see? Um, and then you just figure out what needs to be done and then do it. For someone who's trying to find a specific field of computer science, um, again, I would say that's at least partly based around your interest, partly around what people are hiring for. Um, I think if it's, you know, one thing I feel is useful from both a learning perspective and also from something that you can show to prospective employers is if you don't have experience in a field, but you want to get into it, um, to work on some projects around that field. Say you want to get into gaming, you want to be a mobile game developer, and no one will hire you because you have no experience. You know what? Make some mobile games. Um, they don't have to be complex, right? They could even be an exact clone of existing games. I mean, because you're not putting it out on the market. It could just be like, hey, look, here's Flappy Bird or whatever. Here's whatever game. I made it from scratch, but duplicating what was out there, to show what I can make. Here are 5 games I did. Or if it's an original game, or maybe clone, but you're like changing some stuff up. Try releasing it, and I think you're going to learn a ton from actually trying to go out and like make your own game, but or project. But 2, it's also something you can show to the employer, and they'll be like, wow, you have that initiative to go and try and do your own thing. So it's like a double benefit, and I would say that would be something. And doing the project will give you a better idea if this is something you want to be doing, for the next 5-10 years, or possibly the rest of your life. Question from Celeste. Sorry, let me. You start and seen success when the internet was just getting started, and now we talk about Web 3.0. What would be your advice to all young professionals from a perspective of Patrick Lee now to a younger self at 22 years old? So a couple things. One, as far as technology-wise, I mean, there's essentially been, in my lifetime, at least 3 major waves in technology. First was desktop computers, when it went from those like mainframe, super giant supercomputers, whatever, to the point where, you could actually have a computer in your own home. That changed a lot of things for a lot of people. Originally they thought, oh, it's just going to be a way for people to have their own like word processor, like fancy typewriters, whatever. And it ended up being a lot more than that. And that's how you created companies like IBM and Apple and Sun Microsystems and stuff like that at the time. The second big wave was the internet. That's kind of when I really, I was there during the desktop computer stuff, but I was a child. But when I actually was able to do businesses and stuff, that's when the internet was getting big. And that also changed a ton of things. And that's where you got companies like Google and Yahoo and eBay and Amazon and stuff like that, where they couldn't exist without the internet. And then the most recent big wave was mobile, having mobile phones, basically having a computer with you all the time that also knew your location. And you could get companies like all the mobile gaming companies, you could get companies like Uber, stuff like that. So that was a giant change. And if you were there near the beginning of any of those waves, and you did something that kind of took advantage of that new technology, uh, you could potentially do quite well with your business. Um, and you look at each wave, and it's sort of like, what is it that people have done in the past? How could you do it differently with this new technology? So a good example is like what Amazon did with books. They, in the past, it was like a traditional bookstore. You go into a bookstore to buy books, but how much inventory could they hold? How many books could they have? Like unique titles, maybe 10,000. With something like Amazon, they could have pretty much near unlimited inventory, unlimited titles. They could have 1 million titles. So they could have stuff you would never be able to find in your local bookstore. And books were something that you didn't necessarily have to see it, feel it, touch it. And it's something that could ship pretty relatively cheaply with little damage to the book, right? And could get to you relatively quickly. And so people could go and order from their own home, not even have to go into a bookstore or a library or whatever, and order it and have titles that they couldn't get anywhere else. That's something that was only made possible by the internet, and was a great way of, example of taking advantage of a new technology. I'd say right now, the next wave I'm seeing is artificial intelligence, machine learning. I think that's the next big one. And again, it's not about like, oh, what super specific thing are we doing in artificial intelligence? It's more about what are things that people are already doing? How do you do those things better with artificial intelligence and machine learning? When you look at desktop computers, it got to a point where computers are in everything. When you got to the internet, it's like internet is everywhere. When you get to mobile and portable stuff is everywhere. It's going to be the point where AI and machine learning is going to be everywhere. So that, I think I would definitely look around that. I would look at existing problems and figure out what things can be done better with AI machine learning. Like I said, with example of Rotten Tomatoes, I don't run it anymore, but the ability to show a unique score to each person based on their own taste. And I think that's true not just for movies, but for anything that requires taste. Music, games, books, food, fashion, whatever, is to have something that makes sense for that individual person. And you can only do that with like a lot of data and some good machine learning. Okay. The other two things really quickly to my younger self would be network. That was something I didn't do at all in the beginning. I only kind of did it after Rotten Tomatoes. I think had I networked better before Rotten Tomatoes, could have ended up, with a very different result there. So that's super important. And the other part was focus. I do talks around focus. I think Harshit had listed my focus talk in the registrations. Take a chance to look at that. It's like 17 or 18 minutes long. That was a huge mistake I made with most of my companies outside of Rotten Tomatoes, was I was always trying to do too much too early. So question from Ray. What's a commonly held piece of wisdom that people around you share, but you strongly disagree with? Why? I would say a big one is around focus. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a piece of wisdom, but it's something that almost everyone does all the time, is they just do too much. And you see it at all levels. And so I think it's something that people just naturally do. I like to say in my talk, like with entrepreneurs believe they can do anything. And so they try to do everything, right? And even big companies, you look at WeWork, look at Quibi that just recently said they're shutting down after raising $1.8 billion. And it hasn't even been that long. Look at like Magic Leap. all these companies that are just doing way too much, way too early. And even big companies, a lot of times. I mean, you look at Apple. If you guys read the Steve Jobs like biography, he got kicked out of Apple. They brought over another CEO to take over, and they just massively expanded their product line, just tons of products. Had no idea how to market them anymore. What's the first thing then when Steve Jobs went back? He's like, we're cutting all this down, and he drew a 2x2 matrix of consumer versus business, and I think notebook and desktop, and that's it. 4 products essentially. And he just went back in, cut it down to 4 products, revamped the entire product line, and then they started doing much better. Yeah, right now I'm reading, someone suggested this book to me, I'm reading, it's called like 22 Laws of Marketing. It's actually super funny because it was written in like 1993, 27 years ago. So it's referencing companies that don't exist. Sometimes it references in bad ways and it's right. Sometimes it references in good ways and it's wrong. Like it's talking about like Blockbuster Video and things. And but it's funny because a ton of stuff they talk about in there actually matches what I talk about with focus. And they were saying like the best way when you're marketing is to actually cut things down and essentially be known for like a single word, like what was the example? I think like Listerine and like cavities, or Coke and soda is basically soda, or things like that. Or no, Coke was old, Pepsi came in and was young. They're focusing on teens, I think FedEx originally was focusing, their word was overnight. And then when they started trying to change that word and stop advertising around that into trying to be international, then they started running into problems. Yeah, I think that's something that was super interesting. When you read all these books, you read the book around Steve Jobs, focus is all over that place. You read the book by Peter Thiel, focus is all over the place, and lots of business books, it's in there. Even you think of something like Marie Kondo and the KonMari method. Basically what she's telling you, I mean, from a materialistic point of view, is focus, is like have less stuff, just simplifies everything. And I think that's totally true. But I think people naturally are like, I need more stuff. I need to add more features. I need to add more product lines. I need to target a larger market and more categories and stuff. And generally, a lot of times, yeah, some people are able to do it successfully, but a lot of times they end up doing too many things, get unfocused, and then someone else comes in and just eats their lunch. And you see it over and over again. Okay. Question from Virendra. Do you invest in companies, and is there a medium through which we can reach out to pitch? So I would say I'm not really like a very active angel investor compared to, a lot of my friends. A lot of times when people reach out, it's more about just getting general advice, looking at their startup, getting feedback on that, looking at their pitch. So if you're looking for active angel investors, you would be better off looking elsewhere. As far as reaching me, LinkedIn is one way. If you're able to link a message, I'll put my email here. You can try and use that to connect to me on LinkedIn, and I can add you. And then yeah, you can write questions to me there, and I'm generally pretty good about responding. Yeah. So, question from Pradyam Gupta. What is the approach that we should follow to form an investor network while we are building product and year to launch? I mean, I think in general, I know I wouldn't put more than 10%, maybe 20% of one person's time into like kind of networking. That probably should be the CEO or whoever's going to be pitching. I'd say that's part of their job to do that. But you don't want to have like your whole team spending 90% of your time networking. I mean, I've seen some people who overdo it and they don't actually get anything done with their product. The most important thing, is still getting out there and getting your product built and all that stuff. As far as networking, the rules have all kind of changed a bit. I would say now since COVID, since you can actually go and meet people in person, it makes it a lot harder. But one thing I would say is do some research, see what things are out there, what events are out there. There's a lot more of things like this, a lot more Q&A with, groups of 50 or less, where it's much easier, to potentially get in contact with people. Get in those things, join those things. Most of them are free. I mean, still a lot of things on the virtual events are not charging at all, or charging much, much less than they would if it was like a full-on conference. $1,000 conferences are now, I don't even know, much, much cheaper and possibly free and available to a much larger audience, So take advantage of that. Get out there, try to meet folks, network. One way is to use your existing network. People can make introductions. People who know you can make introductions. You can meet them, get to know them. If they're willing to, maybe they might be willing to answer some questions. Maybe they're willing to hop on Zoom and chat and give some feedback and advice. I think that's a good, organic, natural way of building your network. I would say also try and do your research. Get on Crunchbase, get on AngelList and kind of figure out who makes sense to talk to and connect with. Get into the communities that are related to what you're doing. If you're working in gaming, if you're working in, blockchain, if you're working in whatever, there's communities for just about anything out there. Get in them, become active in those communities. Those are probably going to be some of the first users that you'll ever, that will be using your product. So do that as well. Okay. Question from Vivek. Any specific nonfiction books which you suggest for people just starting their careers? A couple of places of stuff that I found interesting. One is not books, but like blogs. One is Paul Graham. He was one of the co-founders of Y Combinator. He has a blog with posts since, I don't even know, 15, 20 years ago. But a lot of that stuff is still super relevant. I would definitely get in there and just read everything. Most of that, like over 90%, 95% of it, still super relevant. Really good stuff. Very, to the point. Like he doesn't waste a lot of time with like super long ones. It's just, some of those blogs are quite short, but they really hit a certain point very well. Another one is Andrew Chen. He wrote really good blogs around like growth hacking and viral marketing and things like that. I think he was the head of or very high up at Uber around that. And then he's now a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. I believe a lot of his stuff is still up online. Go read it. It's really good. As far as business books, let me look at my Kindle. Which ones? Peter Thiel had a book called 0 to 1 that was basically a collection of, I think, his blogs. That one wasn't bad. I really personally liked the Steve Jobs book. His experience is very different and everything, but I just thought it was a really amazing entrepreneur story. What else? I recently read Range. I recently also read Grit. Those aren't bad. there's a book I read, but it wasn't very good. But the concept of it I liked a lot, called Ikigai. Uh, it's like a Japanese kind of way of thinking about like what you should do for your career. And if you go and Google it, I'll type the name Ikigai. It's like a Venn diagram or whatever of 4 circles, and each circle is like, God, what is it? I'm Googling it right now. I'll try and find the image and put it in. Oh yeah. Open the image in YouTube. Okay, here. Let's see, control. Putting it in chat. And it's what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, what you can be paid for. And Ikigai is kind of that intersection of all 4 of those. Like that's ideally what you want to be doing. When I saw it, I thought it was super interesting. I think there's actually a better version of this that even covers the parts immediately around Ikigai, because I think this one actually doesn't show it. Actually, let me find a better version. But yeah, I thought that one was super. Just when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, like it was something I didn't even do. Oh yeah, here it is. I think this one's better. This is a better version. Because like I never really focused on money at all. I actually had like almost like an aversion to really focusing on money because I'm not materialistic and stuff. I don't care about things. And so I actually sat above Ikigai. I was that part that was delight and fullness, but no wealth. So, but when I saw it, I was like, actually, this is correct. This is the right balance. It's not important to just only focus on like what you love or what you're good at or what the world needs. It's like to find that balance between the 4 was really interesting. And I saw that. I really thought it was powerful. I tried finding books around it. I read one, but it was not good. The book itself was not good, but the concept is good. So I think you can go out and probably find some blog articles that as good as any book you'll find. Okay. Question from Ashrish. What is a better strategy? Think how to monetize first or first build an engaged community? I think it's useful to figure out how you will monetize, but generally, if you don't have any users, you're not going to be able to make any money, right? Like, but depending on the strategy, monetization can be very important. For instance, Netflix, they sell product. You have to be a subscriber to access it. They give away, a lot of times they give away like 1 free month kind of trials. But because they know they can make a certain amount of money from every customer over the lifetime of that customer, they can spend up to that amount marketing to acquire that customer. And because they can actually acquire customers, paid customers, then they can market, and that is their primary growth strategy, is through paid marketing. But I would say in general, you should focus on getting users for the most part first, except in cases like where you're selling a product. If you're selling a physical product, you will need to think about how much can you sell it for, how much can you get it for, right? And you need to ideally have positive unit economics around that. Like you need to sell it for more than it costs you to make it. Otherwise, the more you sell it, the more you're going to lose. But if it's something, more like a Rotten Tomatoes or something like that, you look at like a YouTube or I don't know, Instagram, Snapchat. I don't think they made anything. Twitter for a while. In some cases, until they were even acquired or whatever, they weren't really making money because it was much more important to just get out there and grow users. So it kind of, I think, depends a bit on what kind of company you're building. Question from Rahul. For you, how IMDb is different from Rotten Tomatoes? Yeah, so I mean, IMDb is, I mean, they are much bigger than Rotten Tomatoes. They're easily an order of magnitude larger. Rotten Tomatoes is a site that's consistently in top 1,000. I think IMDb is like top 100. You know, much bigger in terms of traffic. They are user generated. We have user reviews, but they are like everything on IMDb is basically generated by users. But they're primarily known for like, they're solving the problem of like, where have I seen that guy before? What else has he been in, right? And so they're much more about cast, crew, and filmography, I would say, than reviews. I mean, they have user reviews, but they don't verify if you've actually seen the movie. So you can just go in there and you can vote a movie up or down without ever having seen it. And that's definitely happened. And Rotten Tomatoes is more trying to solve the problem of like, what should I see? And so, yeah, I mean, there's stuff on Rotten Tomatoes that is similar to IMDb. We still have cast, crew, filmography information, but people aren't really using it for that, and vice versa. IMDb does have user reviews and things like that, but I think people tend to more use them to look up cast, crew, filmography, etc. Question from Arjun. How do you overcome the challenge of building a robust team in the initial years? I mean, for me, my teams were very small in the very beginning. I mean, in terms of co-founders, my first company, there's 4 of us. My second one, there was 2 of us. Third one, there was 3 of us. Fourth one, there was like 4. Fifth one was mostly like 4. I mean, I guess technically you could say it was 6, but really some of the people weren't very active. Last one was like 3. So it doesn't take a lot to start. And most of my co-founders were friends I knew from college. So I would say ideally it's 2 or 3 people. I think 3 personally is a good number. And people have complementary skill sets. So you don't want all marketing people or whatever. You know, ideally, one person. For us with Rotten Tomatoes, one person was around product, one was around technology, and I was more on the business side. And so that's all you don't need to go and build a big team in the beginning. I would say you shouldn't have a big team because if you do, it almost definitely is going to make you unfocused and you're going to try and do too much. And very early on, when you're trying to iterate, more people means more people you have to explain things to and more people you have to get on the same page as you and stuff. So actually having less you can probably move a lot faster. And once you have something that is working, then you kind of start hiring more people that can help build that part out for you. Yeah. So I think that's all the questions right now. I have about 9 minutes left. Does anyone else have any additional questions? Okay. Question from Padium. Could you connect us to some best communities of mentors and investors? I mean, investors, no. I mean, I can't make an intro to someone I don't know. Like, I can't intro someone I don't know to investors that are my friends or whatever. It's just because you have to vet somebody before you make an intro, right? If you don't know them, you don't know the company, it's impossible. Because what happens if that person is weird or rude? It's happened to me before. One time someone added me on LinkedIn. I didn't know the person, but it looked like they went to the same, went to Berkeley as well. They seemed normal. They were Asian. So I was just like, oh yeah, I guess I'll add this person. Then they asked me to promote a blog, asked me to get feedback on my blog or a blog article they wrote. And I'm like, okay, sure. But what they really wanted was for me to promote the blog article. And so I was looking at it and then I started writing some feedback to them. And the whole time they were just like, thanks a lot. Can you promote it? Thanks a lot. Can you promote it? And I was just finished. I was like, as I'm trying to type my feedback to them, finish writing my feedback, and it wasn't even that bad. And they just like went crazy, and they just started like cussing me out, saying I'm stupid, whatever. I'm just like, whoa, what the heck? And you know, I blocked the person all, and that's why now my LinkedIn requires like my email address, because I realized afterwards I need to be more careful. But yeah, you get folks like that who are like, hey, can you make a bunch of intros? It's not possible, like without knowing the person. And ideally, I wouldn't make intros to investors unless I know them well, like multiple interactions with them, you know, really get a sense of who they are as people, know them, know their company, and in general too, how's their company doing? You know, is it actually look positive? Because when I make an intro to investors, I want the investors to be like, oh wow, this is a really interesting company or a really interesting founder. Like there has to be value added on both sides. You can't just have it one-sided. Because if I'm constantly just introing to people, to investors, where those investors have no interest or need to meet with these people, there's nothing that they would invest in, those investors are not going to take my intros anymore, right? As far as mentors and stuff, again, there are tons of communities and startup and accelerators and things out there. Tons. I mean, so many. I mean, I want to say there's probably more than 10,000 accelerators out there. I'm pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure if you're serious about doing your startup, you will get into at least one of them. You just have to look. And there are a lot of them with like communities that are involved. You know, just like Mozilla Builders, they have a Open Labs community. There was like, I think 300 startups that went in there, and the same mentors that were mentoring the accelerator were mentoring in Open Labs and meeting, you know, every week with different companies in the Open Lab. And yeah, and it was just available. So, and I'm sure that exists elsewhere. So, you know, like Berkeley Skydeck, they have the companies they invest in, but they also have hot desks, which are other companies they think are interesting that have access to a lot of the same resources. So you just got to get out there and look. You can't just necessarily rely on someone to go out there and just give that to you. Yeah. Question from Rahul. How do you look at competition? Would you worry about them while building a startup? My feeling is don't spend too much effort around worrying about competition. Mainly because, you know, I think it's fine to go and spend like a few hours on Google, and you can Google around. I'm pretty sure you're going to find your competition out pretty quickly, and you can read up on them, maybe look up the Wikipedia, look at their site, things like that. Don't spend weeks or months obsessing about the competition. If you do, you're just going to convince yourself not to do your startup, right? Because I'm sure there's tons of startups out there that are doing something probably like 95% the same as what you're doing. And when you find them, generally they're going to fall into one of two buckets. One, they did your idea and they're doing amazing, they're huge. In which case you see them and you're going to be like, wow, they're huge. I don't think I can compete with them. I'm going to give up. Or vice versa. They did your idea and it bombed. In which case you see them, you're like, well, they just did my idea and it didn't work. It must be a bad idea. And then you give up. But look at like Google. When they started, how many search engines had failed before them? They could have looked at any of those, like Excite, and given up. Or they could have looked at Yahoo. Yahoo was massive when they started. And they could have looked at either one of those and given up. Look at Facebook when they started. You know, Friendster was one of the first social networks, and they failed. They could have looked at that. Or MySpace was massive when they started. Same thing. They could have looked at MySpace and said, oh, I can't compete. I think in the beginning, just know what's out there. I mean, it is important to kind of have a sense of your competition. Don't obsess about it. Just solve your own problem. And a lot of times with competition, it's more important to just, again, focus, carve out something, make it your own, right? MySpace, yeah, it was targeting teens. But then Facebook's like, you know what, we're going to target college students. And they did it. Like, look at Amazon. You know, Barnes and Nobles, Borders were huge companies. bookstores. And Amazon's just like, okay, we're just going to carve out an internet bookstore and just do that. Make it your own thing. Create, in a way, like a new category or new market that's slightly different from the way everyone else does it. Don't just try and compete doing the exact same thing for the exact same people, but we're better. Like, try to see if you can make it a little bit different. When Google came out, Yahoo was doing everything with humans. They were just a directory that was all generated by humans, and Google's like, we're doing the AI version of this, and yeah, and they made something. I mean, they were doing something better, but they're doing it quite differently. And at the time when they first came out, their results were like 10x better than the way Yahoo was doing things, and they could cover a lot more because they were doing it through computers and AI. So yeah, I would say think about how you do it differently. Think about how you can slice something out. Like, YouTube. There's a bunch of big companies that were doing live streaming, but then Twitch came out and they're like, we're just going to do live streaming for games, and look how that turned out. So anything out there you can carve. When they start getting too big, you can carve something out. I mean, Zappos was able to carve out shoes, even though Amazon was selling shoes, and Amazon was very good at selling shoes. So, okay. I think that's it. I actually have to run, unfortunately. Thank you all for joining this talk. Hopefully it was useful. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer your additional questions over there. Yeah, and good luck with all your startups and that you're doing, or anything else that you're trying to do. Okay, take care. Bye, Heather. Bye, Ray. Bye, Harshit.